Okay, what I'm interested in is decisions you have taken, for example, on welfare, where the IFS, I think, put the figure to over 3 billion, on winter fuel, where your own government figures put the cost as an additional 1 billion. There will be known pressures from decisions you have taken, which will be coming in the forthcoming budget. And what I'm interested in is the trend of a fiscal headroom which was insufficient, and you've already had to take measures to restore it. Warnings of that and warnings from industry. And again, without getting into writing a budget ahead of October, I'm interested in the trends and whether you're concerned.
No, I mean, I am, Stephen. You've been in this.
Right, brace yourself, because what you're about to witness is not just a committee debate. It's the political equivalent of watching someone try to explain how a toaster works while the toast is already on fire. We open with our dear Keir Starmer seated like a man who's just realized he's left the oven on, ready to face the music. And by music, I mean Mr. Barkley, who's holding a metaphorical violin bow in one hand and a financial spreadsheet in the other, itching to play the song of awkward questions in D minor. Before we show you the full video footage of the debate, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video.
Prime Minister, you've just been at pains to point out to Mr. Byrne how much you're spending on different things. In May, the government had the second highest borrowing since records began, with only peak COVID in May 2020 being higher.
Sorry, I missed the middle word there, Steve.
I'm
so sorry.
In May, your government borrowed the second highest amount since records began, £17.7 billion you borrowed just in the month of May, and only peak COVID in May 2020 was higher. Do you expect borrowing this year to be higher or in line with forecast at the budget?
Oh, in line with forecasts, and there have been monthly fluctuations, usually for global reasons, as you'll have seen in a number of other countries. But we have also obviously got our overarching fiscal rules in place, which are ironclad, one of them relating to borrowing as a proportion of debt.
So tomorrow we will get both the June figure but also the figure for your first year in government of how much you've borrowed. You're expecting that to be in line with what was set out in the budget?
Well, I'll see what the figures are tomorrow, and there have been, I think every month this year there have been fluctuations, broadly driven, and I think generally accepted as driven, by events that are happening globally, almost capable of being tracked to them day by day. But I want to be in line with the forecasts. We've got the fiscal rules in place to ensure that we are in line with the forecasts.
Well, the spending decisions you've been talking about weren't global factors, they're national decisions. At the spring statement, the OBR found that there was a £14 billion deterioration in the fiscal forecast, the fiscal outlook from between the budget and the spring statement. Industry analysts are predicting a similar amount of deterioration ahead of the budget. Again, is that something that you would reject?
Well, my experience so far has been of different predictions almost on a weekly basis as we get into the final stages of the budget, which is why I think it's important to see them over a slightly longer term and see what precisely those forecasts are when we get to the autumn. And I don't say that frivolously. I mean, I was very concerned only a few weeks ago when the conflict in the Middle East looked like it was going to escalate rather than de-escalate. I was very concerned about the impact that would have on oil prices and on our economy as a result. And therefore, I do think it's important for us to see this over a slightly longer term.
I mean,
we're tracking it, as you'd
people
imagine,
would accept
very,
the
very
slight
closely.
variations. What I'm trying to tease out is whether there's a trend, and you're rejecting, for example, pretty widely accepted industry analysts that there's an expected further deterioration. For example, ING had predicted a further 14 billion. You're saying that's quite wide of the mark.
Well, let's see what the OBR's forecasts are in the autumn.
Right.
As I say, my experience is that those forecasts change on a pretty regular basis, often according to external factors, and trying to guess now what the forecast might be in the autumn is fraught with all sorts of difficulties.
Fine. In terms of consistency then, given other things change, is it reasonable to say, with regard to the fiscal headroom that you set out, that as a point of principle, you feel that there should be a reasonable amount of fiscal headroom?
Yes.
And you took measures to restore the headroom in the spring statement. Was
Yes.
that because the fiscal headroom you put in place at the budget was too insufficient?
No, I don't think so. I'd generally point out that the fiscal headroom we put in the budget was considerably more than the last government put in their last budget by some measure. But then there was a lot of fluctuation in the early part of this year, particularly with conflicts in different parts of the world, but also with the immediate after effects of the tariff decisions that were being taken, for example, in America, had an impact. And it was right, in my view and the Chancellor's view, that we retained the fiscal headroom.
Okay, so even though the headroom at the budget was insufficient and you, in my view, rightly took measures at the spring statement to restore it, the OECD are wrong when they said last month, again, pointing to how thin the fiscal headroom is. Again, you feel both industry analysis is incorrect, and you see warnings from the likes of the OECD as incorrect in terms of suggesting it is way too thin.
No, I'm not saying they're incorrect. I'm just saying I think it's important for us to look at it in the round and over the slightly longer period. I do think it's important to have that headroom, which is why we put it in the budget last autumn, and why in the spring statement we took the duty to put that headroom back in, which is what we did.
The OBR found that of 21 forecasts that they have done since 2010, all but one of those was overly optimistic. Are you confident that the OBR forecast done at the budget will not be over-optimistic this time?
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, that's a matter for the OBR. They make the forecast. They're there for a purpose. And we obviously take what forecast they put in place and act accordingly.
Okay, what I'm interested in is decisions you have taken, for example, on welfare, where the IFS, I think, put the figure to over 3 billion, on winter fuel, where your own government figures put the cost as an additional 1 billion. There will be known pressures from decisions you have taken, which will be coming in the forthcoming budget. And what I'm interested in is the trend of a fiscal headroom which was insufficient, and you've already had to take measures to restore it. Warnings of that and warnings from industry. And again, without getting into writing a budget ahead of October, I'm interested in the trends and whether you're concerned.
No, I mean, I
am,
Stephen. You've been in this position preparing for budgets, and you will know the experience, which is that there are forecasts that, as you lead into a budget, begin in the end come on a weekly basis and fluctuate week to week, literally, and therefore. My experience of the budget and the spring statement is to focus intensely on the forecasts when we get them and prepare for them now according to our fiscal rules, which is what we're doing.
Well, you would accept that the size of gap we're talking about is more than mere fluctuations?
Well, look, back in the autumn, the OBR predicted one thing. By the spring, it predicted something else. By autumn, they will give their prediction going forward from there, and we have to work from that forecast.
But that's been consistent in a deteriorating line. That's the concern. It's not been fluctuating and getting better for some of the time. It's been consistently deteriorating.
Well, different forecast different things. Nobody forecast that we'd have the highest growth in the G7 for the first quarter of this year, but we did. And I'm pleased about that. And I think the measures we're taking can create the conditions in which we can improve on that in the autumn and the budgets thereafter.
Now, before Barkley even gets going, you can see it on Starmer's face. That slight squint, the polite nod, the carefully prepared. I'm listening, but I'm also thinking about what I'll have for tea expression. Barkley clears his throat, and you know it's coming. He thanks the chair, addresses Prime Minister, and then bam, he dives straight in. Prime Minister, you've just been at pains to point out to Mr. Byrne how much you're spending, and Starmer's already shifting in his seat, mentally rehearsing the word global in case it comes in handy later. Barkley, however, is not here to be fobbed off with vague platitudes. He brings out the big number 17, £7 billion borrowed in May alone. Only Peak Co beat it. It's like telling someone you didn't just eat the cake, you ate the entire bakery, mate. Starmer nods, trying to look serious while calculating whether 7 billion sounds worse if you say it slowly. He responds with something about being in line with forecasts and monthly fluctuations, which, if you've ever listened to politicians, is the political equivalent of saying, well, things go up and things go down. He sprinkles in the word ironclad for good measure because nothing says trust me like pretending you're talking about medieval armor. Barkley isn't having it. He points out the spending decisions weren't global factors but national ones. Translation, mates, you can't blame the moon and tides for this. He reminds Starmer that at the spring statement there was already a £14 billion deterioration in the fiscal forecast. 14 billion. That's not a hiccup. That's a financial burp loud enough to wake the neighbors. Starmer, still in nothing to see here mode, decides to play the forecast change card. He paints a picture of the global economy like a moody teenager, unpredictable, temperamental, and possibly grounded. He even throws in the Middle East conflict and oil prices as if to say, look, I'd love to fix the budget, but have you seen what's going on out there? Barkley narrows his eyes. This isn't his first rodeo. He wants to know if Starmer rejects the industry analyst predicting another £14 billion downturn. Starmer gives the political masterclass of answering without answering. Let's see what the OBR says in the autumn translation. Ask me later when I've had a biscuit and a. Barkley, undeterred, goes for consistency. Is it fair to say there should always be reasonable fiscal headroom? Starmer agrees. Yes, they should, which is like agreeing you should have an umbrella in Britain. Then Barkley pokes at the fact they had to restore headroom in the spring. Starmer puffs up and points out they had more headroom than the last government, because if you can't win the current argument, you can at least win the history quiz. But Barkley's not giving him a break. He quotes the OECD, who've basically said the fiscal headroom is thinner than the last custard cream in the tin. Does Starmer think they're wrong? Starr says not wrong, just let's look at it in the round. Oh yes, the mystical political circle. Look at it long enough and maybe it'll turn into good news. Barkley then brings out the OBR's track record. Out of 21 forecasts since 2010, only one wasn't overly optimistic. He's basically saying, mate, these people have been wrong more times than a sat-nav in rural Wales. Starmer responds with the verbal shrug. That's a matter for the OBR, which of course is politicians speak for, not my circus, not my monkeys. Then we get into specifics: winter fuel payments, welfare decisions, billions here, billions there. Barkley's painting a picture of fiscal headroom that's thinner than a British rail sandwich. Starmer, sticking to his forecast fluctuate script like it's the only line in the play. Barkley tries one last time. This isn't just fluctuations, it's consistent deterioration. Starmer counters with his trump card. Different forecast different things, which is technically true in the same way that different weather reports report different rain. He even tries to sneak in a bit of optimism by boasting about the highest growth in the G7 for the first quarter, like someone who just remembered they won a school sports day race in 1983. By the end, Barkley thanks him, but you can feel the unspoken "I'll be back" hanging in the air. Starmer gives a final smile, the kind you give when you've just dodged every question, but still somehow stayed on your chair. Now, as a viewer, you're left wondering, did we actually get any answers? Or was this entire thing a masterclass in verbal origami, folding the conversation into shapes so elaborate you forget what the paper was for in the first place? The only thing we know for sure is that the phrases fluctuations in the round and let's wait for the autumn are now permanently etched into the nation's political bingo cards. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get through a grilling without turning into toast. Of course, in the real world, we all know budgets aren't magic, forecasts aren't fortune-telling, and committee debates aren't comedy sketches. But for a glorious half hour, we gotta watch the ancient British tradition of question evasion in full ceremonial display, and frankly, for political theater, it was beautiful, a bit like Shakespeare, if Shakespeare had been obsessed with fiscal headroom and GDP growth. So next time you hear forecasts fluctuate, just remember it might not be an answer, but it's certainly something. Thanks for watching this video till the end. Please like this video and don't forget to share with your loved ones. Thanks.